Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about drawing shadows in Rhino, and in the next video we'll talk about hatches. Shadows probably take up an entire video. Okay, so let's look at this geometry that I have, and there'll be some other tricks in here which hopefully are useful. So we want to put shadows on the plan that we've been looking at, and that plan is has been generated from these volumes. And let's say, as is so often the case, we sort of imagine our drawing using a clipping plane. So I have the clipping plane in the place where the approximate place where I want to draw or let's say the exact place where I want to draw my plan. And right now I just have these solid chunks, right? And I want to cut these and I want to make 2D. So it would be good if we gave these objects a wall thickness in advance. Now, there are a couple of ways that you could do this. Let me go to Ghosted View, and I could use the Offset Surface command, and let's say I want a 2-foot wall thickness for these volumes. By default, it's going to grow outwards. I'm going to just click it, and it will grow inward. Okay, now we can't Boolean this out of the outer shape, this new inner shape. We can, however, get a sense if we go to shaded and turn on our clipping view. Let's see here, what this is going to look like. And if you look at this, that inset operation for the shell produced some not great results. So I want to show you a trick that could give you better results. So I just deleted that offset interior shell. And what I've done is I've copied those objects over here. And I'm basically just going to trim away what I don't need using a Boolean command. So I'm going to type Boolean difference. That's actually just what popped up. Hit enter. I'm going to subtract from these surfaces. Enter. Subtract with this. And it actually isn't subtracting what I want. It's just a single surface, right? I've actually set that up on purpose so I can show you how to fix it, or fix this if this happens to you. If you want to use a single surface to Boolean objects, and it Booleans the part that you want to keep, all you need to do is select the object that you're cutting with, type flip, F-L-I-P, hit enter. It flips the direction of the object. Now, when I run the Boolean difference again, select these objects that I want to subtract from, enter, subtract with, enter. Okay, cool. Now I have what I want to see. All right, so how am I going to give this thickness? Now, you could fake all of this. You could just explode this, take the top off, right, and make 2D from this. But then once you draw your thickness in plan, these lines, the interior elevation of what you're looking at, won't match up, right? So let me undo that and make sure that's all one solid. There's a really great command called shell. And shell, we can specify a thickness. I'm working in feet right now, so my thickness is, want a 2-foot wall thickness. And if you look at shell, select faces to remove from closed poly surface. So the requirement is that you have a closed poly surface. So maybe let me just show you how this is working on a simpler object. But if I have this cube and I type shell, I can select one face, hit enter, and now it's giving me a 2-foot wall thickness all around the object. And if I turn on the ghosted, right, you can see that basically it's a pocket. What's cool about this command is, let me run it again. Let me turn off ghosted, turn on shaded rather, and let me run the shell again. And let's say if I pick, these faces, it's giving me something like this. So it's a very quick way to thicken solid geometry. So I'm going to run shell on these guys, selecting all of these faces. My thickness is set to 2, in this case 2 feet. Hit enter. Okay, great. Now I have these things properly offset, and you can see that we're getting a much better offset than we were when we offset the whole poly surface, or let's say inset the whole poly surface. So it's just easier for Rhino to calculate this. Okay, so before we would make this, run a make 2D operation on this, we would probably also take this plane and use it to trim anything that's poking through, so that we find the floor. Now it could be that in your case, the case of a project that you want to do, your objects or your volumes, your architecture, let's say, is not stopping at the ground but digging down in which case you would want to do the reverse. You would want to use these things to trim away the surface so you've got a correct view. And you might do that by running intersect, right? So if you had geometry here, let's say I can't really trim the surface with this, but let's say if I, if I were looking down on this, and let me shell this. Okay, and I want to see down into it. What I could do is intersect these two things. Okay, hide this momentarily, take this, trim it, bunk. Okay, cool. Get rid of that line. Get rid of both of the lines. Show it. Okay, now I'm looking down into that object, right? So, by the way, if you ever want to get rid of a hole on a NURB surface, all you have to do is untrim, click that, and boom, it's gone, right? In Rhino, when you trim a NURB surface, you're only ever just masking it. So whenever I do something like that, trim, if I turn the points on for this surface, F10, the surface is still there. If I want to show it, all I need to do is untrim. Okay, cool. All right, so let's get back to shadows. So I've already run the make 2D on this. So what I want to do is generate my shadows. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate an image, a shadow image, and then I will underlay that in Rhino using the picture tool, and I'll just quickly trace the shadow lines. All right, so, but how do we turn on shadows? Let's go to rendered. Okay, and by default, we might see something like this. And I can see here that the display color of this object is, I've updated it, and that's jumping ahead. So let's not make it the same as everything else. Okay, cool. All right, so by default, we might see something like this, and we have no shadows. So to fix this, now we're in the rendered view, we can go to display options here, and it should pop this up. If it doesn't, you can also just go to options, type options. The microphone's in the way of the keyboard. There we go, options. And if I don't see it, I can come down to view, find the view mode that I'm interested in this case rendered. And I want to drill down through this and find shadows. And then I want to turn shadows on, okay? And now you may see some shadows. Now, you may not, or your shadows may look a little odd. What I recommend is setting a sun. So if we go to, again, to the Properties tab, and then find the Renderings tab, let's see, the Rendering tab, we can, if it's not on by default, turn on the sun. And then under sun settings, you can pick a location by scrolling down. You can hit here if you're in Columbus. It should find you if your IP address is correct. But you can select Columbus, and then you can select a month and a time of day. And I recommend just like, playing around with this. If you look in your, now this is obviously going to be per view. So right now I'm in perspective. I'm going to kind of come over to this plan, a near plan view. And you can move this around and find a good shadow setting. And I had something good set up, so I'm going to hit cancel. But over in the rendering tab, you want to make sure that you toggle on the sun. And along with that, in your display options for rendering, you want to make sure that your lighting method is not default, which will give you something else, but the scene lighting, which corresponds to the sun settings that you're making. All right, so I'm going to, so this is looking pretty good. I'm going to go to the top view, and I'm going to turn on the rendered view for the top view. And this is basically what I want to trace. Now, there's some things that I might want to tweak with the shadows. A couple of things, actually. So the first thing is that I want to go back to display options, look at the shadows, and I want to make the shadows sharper. So you can kind of, yeah, so you can see actually down here, if you make them more grainy, they have more artifacts along the edge. If I come over all the way to the edge, I make them super sharp. Same with edge quality. I want to come down to like the, let's say, I don't want any softness on the edge. So I come to none, meaning no softness, and hit OK. And this is working pretty well. And what you can see, though, is that these shadows are pretty jagged. And the reason is because I have so much geometry in my scene. Let me actually go back to wireframe. I really, when I'm, looking at shadows in the Rhino viewport, I only want to be looking at the geometry that I'm interested in. So you really need to hide everything else momentarily while you have the shadows on, at least for what we're doing. Now, if I come back, you can see I can have like super sharp shadows. Now, if I hit show or type show and hit enter, you can see now I've turned on all of that geometry again. And Rhino is casting shadows for everything, and it's devoting fewer resources to the one object that we're interested in. So if I undo that hiding operation, now it's just casting shadows for this, and they're easier to see. So I could go ahead and just make an image file from this, which would be fine. But it might a couple of other things. When we're drawing the shadows, it might be useful to. So sometimes with the this is really, really dark. So it could just be the tone on the object, or it could be a shadow being cast on the object. If we want to see what is truly a shadow, it might make sense, because we're tracing these things, to give them a weird color. So I'm coming back to shadows. I can actually set the shadow color not to black, but to red. Hit OK. Cool. All right, now I'm seeing what is actually a shadow, and I can see that this dark moment here was in fact just a really dark tone and not a shadow. So when I'm tracing the shadow, I just want to trace that. You can also see this glow around the objects. That has to do with the simulated global illumination, I think, from the sun. If you click skylight, okay, now skylight goes away, and we get just our shadows. We're also getting, it's becoming a little bit confusing as to where our geometry is, because it has the same color as the plane. And we need that plane, because if we delete it, then we can't cast shadows on it anymore. So what I might do is just find that plane in the properties, and let's look at its display color. Let's give it a different material, actually. So if you would come over to material, instead of using layer material, let's make a new material, can make a new custom material, and let's set that to just something like that. Okay, cool. Now it's really clear where the surfaces are and where the plane is. Okay, so in the next video, will show you how to make an image file of this and bring it into Rhino so that we can trace our shadows.